Welcome to Season 3 of The Spiritually Curious Therapist, the podcast for mental health professionals, healers, and seekers who believe that true healing happens at the intersection of psychotherapy, nervous system science, and holistic body-centered wisdom. I'm your host, Jody Silverman, licensed therapist, Reiki master and teacher, and all-around consciousness guide. I'm here to explore how we integrate the clinical with the intuitive, the evidence-based with the energetic, and the psychological with the soulful. Each week, we will dive into practices, frameworks, and conversations that support deep healing, both for ourselves and the people we serve. And just a quick note, while I'm a licensed therapist, this podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy. So let's get curious about the body, the nervous system, the heart, and the wisdom that lives within it all. Welcome back to the Spiritually Curious Therapist. Today we have a really special guest. Some of you may already be aware of her, and I'm so excited for what she is bringing not only to our conversation today, but also the field as a whole and the movement of bringing holistic practices into clinical work. LeNaya Smith Crawford is the holistic therapist. She's a licensed therapist, holistic mental health educator, business mentor, international teacher, and wellness CEO. With over a decade of experience, she helps therapists, healers, and leaders reclaim their wholeness, integrate holistic practices into their work, and build aligned, sustainable businesses rooted in care and purpose. Right up my alley. LeNaya earned her bachelor's in psychology from Spelman College and her master's in marriage and family therapy, specializing in trauma and spiritual integration. She is also an advanced certified yoga, breathwork, and meditation teacher and a sound healer. Her passion for this work was born from her own healing journey, where embracing the 5 layers of self led to deep transformation. I'm curious about those 5 layers. Remind me to come back to that. LeNaya's approach blends clinical expertise with ancestral, somatic, spiritual, and holistic healing practices. At the heart of her work is a deep belief that we are all worthy of the time it takes to nourish our minds, bodies, and souls, and of living in our heart's deepest desires. LeNaya is the creator of the Holistic Therapist Academy, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, Essence, the Huffington Post, Healthline, and on Bravo. She is the CEO and founder of LSC Wellness, Kaleidoscope Therapy, and Holistic Wellness, and the co-founder of 7 Yoga Studio and Yoga School in Atlanta. Oh my gosh, you're doing so much, and I am so excited to be talking to you and hear about your journey and how you're bringing all of these things together in the work that you do. So welcome, LeNaya. So excited to have you here.
Yes, I'm excited to be here.
Why don't we just start with you telling us a little bit more about who you are at a soul level, how you got to where you are now, and what exactly it is you're doing. Like, what does your day-to-day look like in terms of your work?
Absolutely. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about how I got here. I think you'll get a little sense of who I am through that.
Perfect.
So again, super excited to be here, super excited to talk about holistic mental health and healing. And so I am the daughter of 2 pastors. Both my mom and my dad are pastors. And so I was raised with this idea that in order for us to feel whole, we have to integrate the mind, body, and spirit. And so that was something that was really important in our household and something I kind of always grew up understanding. And so it wasn't until my master's program where I really started to get like a tangible understanding of what that actually means in practice. And so y'all know master's programs are stressful, okay? One of the most stressful times of life. We're trying to get the degree, we're trying to get the clinical knowledge. And so it's there that I really found the power of yoga. Yoga really helped me during my master's program, getting me through a very stressful time, high anxiety, overwhelm, and all the things. And so once I experienced the healing power of yoga, it began to give tangible sense to the body part of the healing journey. And so I found so much value in yoga that I actually graduated the same time with my master's, along with getting my yoga teacher certification. And so one of the things that I always love to share with folks is that I have just as much clinical knowledge as I do in these somatic and holistic practices, because I was like, from the start, if this is helping me heal, I know it's going to help my clients heal. Now, that's not to say there wasn't any, trouble along the way, but we can talk about that a little bit later. And so from there, that was really the journey of starting to integrate this healing work into my work as a therapist, bringing it into the therapy room. And seeing the shifts and changes within the clients. But I honestly am really passionate about this work because since graduating my master's program, life has happened. I have navigated high functioning depression, grief, traumatic loss, burnout. And it was from taking this holistic approach that really helped me heal. And so now I'm really passionate about this work because I understand that if it worked for me through all of those trying times, I know it'll work for our clients and our communities. The proof is in the work that I've done with clients and communities. The proof is also in the work that I've done working with therapists and healers. And on a human level, a couple fun facts about me, I guess. I'm a Virgo. I'm also a first generation American. So my parents migrated over from Jamaica. And being on the beach and near the ocean is where my soul feels most at home. And so I love all things good eats and being by the water.
I love it. So in terms of how you have progressed, you graduate with a master's with the yoga teacher training. You have this experience, this mind-body integration from the start, which is actually really pretty cool because if we think about it, even from a neuroscience perspective, you are integrating all that knowledge together at the same time. And so it's got to be coupled in your system, right? So I love that you came out with that coupling and that stayed with you. What would you say, like, how did you get to a place where knowing that it is that it helped you heal and that is such an important part of healing, but also coming out of school with all this clinical knowledge of boundaries and stay in your lane and your clinical focus and this is yoga, this is mental health. How did you find yourself navigating all of that?
Yeah. So one of the things is in my master's program, I also specialized in trauma. And so in that trauma integration and certification, they talked about the necessity of trauma survivors feeling safe in their body, a deep understanding of dissociation. And so I'm like, huh, well, these are things that yoga does for us. And so having that connection, but also one of the trainings I did right out of my master's program was a trauma sensitive and trauma focused yoga training. So,
Mm.
side of getting my foundational 200-hour, right after graduate school, I really wanted to learn more about how does yoga impact survivors of trauma? How does yoga help folks who've experienced trauma heal? And so, from getting that understanding and coupling it with my clinical knowledge of trauma, clinical integration, all of that, I was like, these worlds definitely have to come together. And to answer your question about stay in your lane, I think many of us in this integrative work have to have like a little bit of rebel in us and or a little bit of this intuitive understanding that staying in your lane to some degree is a colonized version of what it means to be a healer and therapist.
Mm.
So, when we take this idea that we have to stay in our lane, we miss so many great opportunities to help our clients heal in a truly expansive way.
I love what you just said, and it makes me think of what you shared with us just a few minutes ago in terms of both of your parents being pastors, also being first generation American, and the colonization that has occurred here, but also your experience of growing up in a family in which your parents are immigrants. How do you see that impacting your ability to have to come into this with that level of expansion that a lot of us that have been here for generations maybe don't have because of the colonization?
Absolutely. Yes. And that's actually something we taught my parents and I talk about often. There's just a different like mindset specifically coming from, the island of Jamaica. The leadership and things like that it's very different. They see themselves reflected in higher places, and some of the things that Americans have gone through for generations weren't necessarily things that my family had experienced to a certain extent, but not to the extent of those who, were here generationally. And so I think there's a sense of confidence and pride that was instilled in us from childhood. Like, you own who you are, right? And you deserve to be in whatever capacity God has called you to be. You better walk into that room like God sent you there. And so that is something that definitely has been a part of my upbringing, and I think it does really impact the way I show up in this field and in the work that I do.
I just have chills all over my body. Do you mind if I ask you to say that again? Because I think that that's something that not only listeners who are therapists need to hear again, but also anybody who's listening that is trying to step into their own power and has these battles with these core beliefs that have been instilled in us
Right.
around having to, whether it's assimilation or the ways in which we have to show up in order to be accepted and avoid rejection. And the way that you said that, I mean, people can't see us, but like your aura just, whoo, just like I can feel it on the side of the screen. And so I just, if you wouldn't mind saying that again, I think that would be really cool.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to own who you are, and you have to walk into every room like God sent you there. And, even I just want to piggyback off of that point of assimilation. A lot of times in my trainings, I talk about how assimilating or even code switching to a certain extent is traumatic. And so we have to understand that us being ourselves authentically, whether that's the way we work, the way we show up, the way we speak, we have to be able to own that. And when we move through the world from this authentic place, we're giving others the courage to be themselves out loud.
You use the term code switching, and I'm not sure that everybody knows what that means. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of a background around what that word means?
Yeah, so code switching essentially it's pretty prominent in communities of color and maybe communities of color in general. And so it's this idea that in order to feel accepted, you have to closely align your looks, your behavior, your speech, your approach to this European ideal or European standard of success, beauty, and being accepted. And so what that in turn looks like is, you change your hair, you change the way you talk, you change, what you're interested in, all to be accepted by this imaginary, not really, it's not imaginary, it's real, but to be accepted in society, essentially. So that's what code switching.
Thank you for that. And so, how have you, what's your understanding, or how have you seen code switching impact people in terms of their connection to their true self? And you had mentioned that code switching is very traumatic, right? It impacts us on a spiritual level, an energetic level, an emotional level, a physical level, like all the different ways. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how you've seen that play out with folks, and maybe even how you use some of your holistic approaches to help people
Yeah.
become more aligned?
Absolutely. Taking it from a perspective of a therapist who's interested in this spiritual, holistic, and integrative work, and a form of code switching would be pushing down that intuition that comes up in session when there's something you want to share with your client, or knowing that there's a particular tool that would really help this client or community member get to the other side of the thing that they're experiencing, but pushing it down and just sticking to your lane, right? Quote unquote, being by the book, quote unquote. And so, what tends to happen to therapists and healers who do it in that way is we see higher rates of burnout. We see folks saying, you know what, maybe being a therapist isn't for me. Let me, switch my lane. You know, I'm overwhelmed. I can't work authentically. I got to do something else. And so you find that you get so overwhelmed by pushing down who you truly are and the way that you've been called to work, that you end up just leaving the field that you were called to be in. And so that's how it can show up for us as therapists who know that this work is necessary.
Yeah, and I see that a lot. And I see it a lot with therapists who are really struggling with straddling between these two worlds of the mental health insurance backed, this is the way we have to do it, and this is, you know, these are the evidence-based practices, and then the more intuitive, holistic, integrative ways that like many of us show up in the world and show up to the work. And I love what you're saying because I think you're absolutely right. Like that creates such dissonance, and the burnout really stems from people having to show up hour after hour after hour, not paying attention to or honoring their true nature.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And, you know, I think that's really important in this work is how can you show up authentically? And when you can integrate these tools in a confident and ethical way, you start to find this joy about your work again.
So we talked a little bit about the confidence, right? Which is about own your shit. Like this is who you were meant to be. What about the ethics? Because that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yes. So the ethics say you've got to do no harm, but you also have to make sure you're within your scope of practice,
Right.
being within your scope of practice. And so what that means is you have to make sure you have training in these modalities. A lot of what I have seen are, you know, yes, I know this stuff works. It works for me. I went to a free thing or I did a thing and I'm trying to integrate it. That is never going to be ethical, right? The same time and attention that you've given to your clinical expertise, I believe is the same time and attention you need to give to this aspect of the work. So get your training so you are within your scope. That's number one. Number two is we're so fortunate to be in this time where science heavily backs up what African and indigenous folks knew long ago, right? That the work that is needed to heal and to regulate requires movement, breath, sound, you know? And so I think it's important that you do your research, right? I think, especially in the field of somatics, which essentially is just a fancy way of saying, you know, a bottom up approach to healing. You know, somatics is now an evidence based practice. Mindfulness has been an evidence based practice for decades, you know. MDR is now an evidence based practice. And these are all things that, you know, go well beyond what we were taught traditionally as what's within our scope of mental health. And so those are really the two pillars. Get your training, make sure you're within your scope, but also understand that these practices are evidence based. There's research to back it up. And if you have a deep understanding of the nervous system and polyvagal theory, vagal toning, all of
Yes.
these things align with these practices.
Yeah. One of the things that we discovered, my colleague and I, as we're developing the psychotherapeutic Reiki or Reiki assisted psychotherapies training and practices. Yeah. And one of the things we did was we met with an attorney who helped us just kind of conceptualize what we were doing. And she said the exact same thing that you're saying, which is whatever it is you're bringing in to support your practice, you have to have adequate training in. And
Exactly.
so, like a weekend Reiki class, and then you're bringing Reiki into your clinical practice, is probably not going to fly from an ethical perspective. But do your training, get your supervision, do your consultation, document all of those things. And that brings legitimacy, for lack
Yes.
of a better way of saying it, right to the work that you're doing. And so I love that you're saying that. And I think the second pillar being research, which is so important, especially in our culture. Like if there's not research to back it up, it didn't happen. I've heard, which we can have a whole nother conversation about that. But in terms of informed consent and knowing what you're bringing into your practice and why you're doing it. Like, why does this work? How does this work? And even some of the things with, like, so EMDR, we still don't really know how it works. I was listening to a podcast this morning about it. Actually, there's a whole new, I'll just say this out loud. There's a whole new field where people are using EMDR to connect people to loved ones who have passed on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's this like it has a name. It's like afterlife connection. It's a grief treatment, and
Yeah.
it's specifically using EMDR to get people into like process their sadness and then get them into a receptive state where they can connect with people who have passed on. Which I was like, oh my gosh, this is.
So cool.
It's a whole new world. So
Yeah.
yes, but that's an example of bringing in an evidence-based treatment to support something that's outside of the box, might not have in the past be considered scope of practice for a mental health clinician.
Exactly. I think that now is one of the best times to be a holistic and integrative and unconventional therapist because of that reason. There's so much research, and I'm glad to hear that your attorney agrees because I've heard other things. I'm like, what are y'all saying? Are you reading your code of ethics? You just got to make sure you have the proper training. And that's one of the reasons why I created and curated the Holistic Therapist Academy, because, a lot of these trainings, as you know, aren't led by licensed therapists who understand the code of ethics that we have to abide by to make sure that we're protecting our licenses, because in no way am I advocating for you to just leave your license to do this work. There's a way to still do this work and still honor what's necessary to keep your license active and in good standing.
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that the lawyer really, and she's also an energy medicine worker. And
Hi.
so Midge Murphy is her name. And this is her focus, right? She helps people who are doing energy work to make sure that they are operating in an ethical and legal manner. And she's saying exactly what you're saying. Don't give up your license. You worked really hard for this.
Right.
The important thing that she really kind of drove home is, if you are using these holistic practices in the context of mental health work, the mindset is that you're using them to support
Yes.
mental health work. That's why I changed the name of psychotherapeutic Reiki, which is Richard Curtin's protocol, to this overarching Reiki assisted psychotherapy, because we're not doing Reiki. I'm not a Reiki treatment. I'm providing psychotherapy and I'm using Reiki to support that process.
Yes, yes. That is a really important part. Like, you're using it to support. One of the things that we talk about in my trainings is that people, use Reiki and sound healing to heal many different things. But a part of being ethical and being within your scope of practice is we're using this to support the mental health needs of our clients, right? If
Yes.
someone comes into you and they're having a certain pain and they heard that, this particular chakra will help alleviate it, wonderful, but that's outside of my scope, right? If there's something related to, anxiety, depression, trauma, relationship concerns, confidence, these are things that we can work within. And so I think that's another really important part. Like, we aren't using these practices to help folks heal physical ailments and things that are actually outside of our scope. We're using it to support them in their mental health and healing journey.
I really love that differentiation. And I think that's a really important piece, because we can get so lost. And I think I'm probably speaking for myself. I can get so lost in the mind, body, spirit integration that I can lose sight of, I'm a psychotherapist and I'm working with the mental health piece of that triangle. And
Yeah.
even though I have awareness of that and I bring it in, this is my scope of practice over here.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I think that helps give it some parameters, right? Because I think, you get into this work, and especially at the beginning, you're like, oh my gosh, I love this. This is great. I can do this with that. I can do this with this. But I think it helps to give some boundaries to kind of help you stay in a certain guideline while still expanding your approach to help your clients and communities.
Yes. So tell us a little bit more about your academy. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, the Holistic Therapist Academy is my signature certification and immersion program that teaches therapists and mental health professionals how to use the therapeutic power of practices like yoga, breathwork, energy, and sound healing. You're also learning how to ethically integrate and confidently facilitate this work as a therapist while learning how to expand your practice in a holistic way. And so the academy was really birthed out of, people wanted to know, like, LeNaya, you've been doing this for some time. How are you doing it? A lot of the questions that you talked about, how do I do this ethically? I'm billing insurance. What does that look like? I've been trained in X, Y, and Z, but how do I bring these two worlds together? And so it was really birthed from that place. And so The Academy is a 6-month training program. It's virtual, so we've had folks join from all over. And we're really walking you through the journey of what it means to be a holistic therapist. So we start with what the holistic framework is, which is basically integrating the physical, the energetic, the mind and the emotion, the spiritual and the communal aspects of healing. We then talk about the research, right? Because many folks are skeptical about some of these practices, particularly communities of faith, which I definitely understand and resonate with. And so we talk about the science, what's happening in the nervous system, what's happening in the brain, what does the research say about these practices? And then you learn about the psychology of the chakras. As a Reiki practitioner, I know you love this stuff. So taking a deep dive into how do the chakras impact our mental health? How do the chakras and diagnoses align? And
Mhm.
how can we use that to support our clients? And then from there, you learn how to facilitate. So you get really confident in facilitating movement, a breath work, sound healing in a way that honors anxiety, depression, and trauma. So keeping it clinical. Because one of the things, a little tangent, that I think is important for a therapist to understand is that this work is not one size fits all. Not every yoga pose, not every breath work practice, not every energy healing practice is going to work for all the diagnoses. Some of them only work or benefit best for folks who have anxiety versus depression versus trauma and so on and so forth. Then we get to the ethical piece, right? So what's in your informed consent? What's on your website? What does it look like if, in your notes? What does it mean when a client comes in and they're saying they want help with something that's actually outside of your scope of practice, right?
Mhm.
Then we bring it all together at the end and we talk about creating a holistic centered private practice, but also expanding beyond the therapy room. What does it look like to take this work and really get into the community and expand your business as a holistic therapist? And so that's the Academy. We've been running it for almost 6 years now.
Wow.
So really love that training. And I think it's really the perfect training for folks who are interested in this work, have had some experience with yoga, breath work, or sound healing, and really want to feel confident and know that they're doing it ethically.
It's so comprehensive and just feels like a really safe way to begin to explore how to bring these practices into your work.
Yes, absolutely. And even folks who've had training, I've had folks that come in with, they've had, Reiki training, they have sound healing training, they're yoga teachers. And it's important to understand that's great. I think that's part of the journey, but there's still so much, right? How do we deal with skepticism? What does it look like to ethically bring it in to play? How do we expand? So I think it's a really great training for those who are interested in exploring and those who have had experience with some of these practices and are like, I know that I need to work in this way. Please help me.
Yeah, it's an application or the operationalization. I don't know if that's a word of what we're
Make it
talking about.
plain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And which I think is super helpful because my experience in my journeys of interviewing people and talking to other therapists and even doing the psychotherapeutic Reiki trainings is that, as therapists, we do tend to collect these
Yes.
these different practices, right, and techniques. And then it's like, all right, I have all of these experiences and this knowledge, and like I have no idea what to do with them all in actual practice. And so this sounds like a very structured way in which to kind of walk through that. Beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
I have a question. I jotted this down at the very beginning and you brought it up again, and I think it's super important. We don't talk about it enough. Communities. Can you talk a little bit about holistic healing in the context of community?
Yes. So I'm a big believer that we heal in community, right? And I think that's one of the things that have been lost in this beautiful art and work of being a therapist. And so I was actually just talking about this. There are some people that will never step foot in a therapy office. There's just some people that will never do that. But they'll go to a community healing circle, a community breathwork circle, a community something, right? And still be able to access some of this healing power. And so I think that we as therapists, we're the ones I think that are really equipped to get out into the communities and do this work because we understand both sides of it. We understand the healing power of this work. We also understand what it's like for a client to be triggered.
Mhm.
We understand what it's like to make sure that these practices are safe. We understand what it's like to be able to say, actually, this is something that a therapist or a mental health professional can help you with. And so getting out in the community looks like, going to your local yoga studio and hosting a sound bath, going to the park. I used to love when the weather's nice in Atlanta, going to the park and hosting like a breath work or a sound bath or just yoga. It's really beautiful. And so what I have found, and graduates of the academy have found, are folks that kind of come into these spaces and then they realize that, man, I actually need more healing than I thought.
Mhm.
Because this space was curated by someone who has this training, I now have a resource, or they can give me a resource to then be able to get some of the deeper processing that I still believe is necessary on our healing journeys.
That's so powerful because you're right. I mean, a lot of people don't even realize. I mean, I think about it from a nervous system perspective and how many of us are stuck in that loop of sympathetic and
Yeah.
collapse, right? Like, and they so fight, flight, and collapse is like that loop that we get stuck in, especially post COVID. And
Yeah.
right. So, and people don't even realize it because we've been walking around like this for so long. And enter a yoga in the park or a sound healing, and you have the experience, even if it's a little drip of like safety. And it's like, oh shit. Like I I didn't realize I've been holding my body so tightly for so long. And yeah, and then it's like, oh, where can I get more of this? Or how do I continue to process this? And people don't always realize, like, oh, there is this pathway where you can do this work individually or in community or in groups. And I think that's a really important piece. And I love what you said because I don't know that we as therapists always think of ourselves as people who can go out in the community and do our work because that's not how we were trained.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we need to shift that, right? We need to
Yeah.
shift that because our communities need healing. And it also makes this process of healing more accessible, right? Because if you're charging for something, you can charge at a much lower price point for a community or group thing than you will in your therapy office, right? And so I think that we do our communities a disservice when we just keep our skill set to ourselves in our four walls. We got to get out, be in community, and really hear the needs of what our communities need.
Yeah, I love that. Another piece that you mentioned throughout is the necessity of being trauma informed. And
Yeah.
I think in this day and age, most therapists are. I remember, I don't know, it was maybe like 15 years ago. I've been around for a while. Well, I remember being like a baby social worker and working in really traumatized communities and having no idea the impact of trauma or what being a trauma informed means.
Mm-hmm.
And none of us did.
Yeah.
And, it's really only been in the last 10 years that it has become talked about. It's become a standard of care. The ACEs study blew up, and, now all of a sudden everybody understands the impact of childhood trauma on folks later in life. And so, what, how does that play out in terms of these holistic practices?
Yes. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect between what trauma informed means in the therapy room versus what it means to facilitate.
Yes.
And so I'm definitely a big believer that if you're working with people, you must be trauma informed. I love to say trauma informed care is people informed care, right? Because
Yes.
you never know what someone has experienced. But it really is about, I mean, it's the same pillars, right? Safety is really at the core of being trauma informed. And so some little things that you can do when you're facilitating to make sure you're not triggering clients. I think the most easeful thing you can do is to not require clients or community members to close their eyes.
Mm.
Something that's so simple, but I have been in spaces with facilitators who have been facilitating for a long time, even people I've looked up to. And just the simple fact of requiring people to close their eyes sent folks into a deep, deep triggers that, it's been ingrained in me. You give people options. And so typically I love to offer the option of closing the eyes or keeping a low gaze. And if
Mhm.
it's safer for you to keep your eyes open, do that. And really to understand that autonomy is at the core of holding space with these holistic practices. You know, I may be cueing you in a certain movement practice, but if moving to the right, when I say move to the right, doesn't feel good, then maybe move to the left, you know? Or if I cue anything that doesn't feel right in your body, if it doesn't feel good in your body, feel free to skip it. So, really having this understanding of autonomy when it comes to integrating this work is really how being trauma informed really begins to come through. I'm your guide, but my cues are just a suggestion. It's something that I often say, particularly when I'm guiding folks through yoga and movement. And so I think that really is at the hallmark of being trauma informed in this facilitation piece.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Deb Dana polyvagal theory, and I forget what she calls it, but those three pillars of safety, right? Context, choice, and I can't remember if the third one is co-regulation or connection, but they kind of mean the same thing. So I think it's co-regulation. So it really aligns, right, in turn with nervous system safety and awareness in
Yeah.
terms of what helps us move into, or at least be able to approach that ventral vagal state. And it really, choice is so, so important.
Yeah, it's necessary. And to piggyback off of the co-regulation connection piece, we got to do our own work.
100%. Yes.
Got to do our own work. I
Yeah.
really think at the whole, you know, at the forefront of being a holistic therapist, integrative therapist, what have you, is utilizing those same practices that you're so eager to bring into the therapy room to make sure that you're utilizing those practices consistently because life will always do its thing. We're humans just like everyone else. So we're experiencing the chaos of what it means to be alive during this time, but you're also holding space for your client's stuff. And so making sure that you are doing your work will allow you to better be able to hold space for yourself and hold space for others and alleviate a lot of this burnout that the folks are experiencing.
Absolutely. When you were saying that, what was arriving for me is that many therapists go into this field because we have an empathetic nature. And
Yeah.
so we're already sensitive to all of the things that are happening around us, right? And so it's easier for us to get pulled into dysregulation. And
Yeah.
so practicing those techniques or whatever it is that speaks to you, whether it's, yoga or self-reiki or sound baths, as a way of maintaining connection to yourself
Yes.
so that you can hold the field, which is exactly what you just said, but it's mirroring back to you.
Yes. No, I love it. But yes, if you take nothing else from this conversation, do your work.
That's great. So we're just about at the end. Is there anything we did not talk about that you would like to share with folks?
I think this is a really great conversation. Is now the time I can share about some things I have coming up, or is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, would love to hear about all the things you have coming up.
Yeah, so I talked about the Holistic Therapist Academy. Again, if you're wanting to apply the knowledge and learn the knowledge and do it in an ethical and confident way, would love to have you join the Holistic Therapist Academy. I'll send information about that. But I'm also really excited for the first annual Holistic Therapist Conference happening this October 24th through 26th in Atlanta, Georgia. And so this is the time for us as holistic, somatic, unconventional, and spiritual therapists to be in community, to network, to, high five each other and say the work that we're doing is truly impactful, but also to learn some tools and some different skill sets that we can bring into the therapy room. And so the conference is built on three pillars. The first being education. So, yes, you'll get CEs. I know that's important. You'll get CEs, and we have some really great topics, everything from how do you really discern your spiritual gifts to polyvagal theory and intuition to ethical documentation to human design. So, some really great topics there. The second pillar is self care. So, we integrate self care into the conference. you'll be poured into, right? So through restorative and really juicy trauma informed practices. And then the third pillar is all about expansion. So, how can you expand your work beyond the therapy room, both in business, but also getting into the community? And so, really excited about that. And then, just in general, follow me on socials, DM me, ask me questions. I love to be in community with each and every one of you. And so, those are the two big things that are happening in my world. I'd be remiss not to say this. We're going to Bali in 2026. So I host an annual retreat called the Healers Retreat, and
Mhm.
it's specifically for therapists, helpers, and healers. And so we're going to Bali in May 2026. It's all about protecting your peace, protecting your energy. And so that should be really fun.
That sounds amazing. And the holistic conference, therapist conference sounds amazing as well. So that's really exciting. And you'll send me all that information. I'll put everything in the show notes, including all your socials and ways that folks can contact you. I'm so glad that we connected and I was able to hear all about the things that you're doing. I really appreciate you and all of the work that you're doing to bring holistic practices into the mental health field.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and I hope we'll stay connected.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thanks for joining me today on the Spiritually Curious Therapist. I hope something in this conversation sparked insight, inspiration, or even a little soul level curiosity. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you would take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's walking the healing path. You can connect with me more deeply over on Instagram at Holistic Heart Healing or visit Therachi.com and JourneyWithKindredSouls.com for upcoming courses, healing sessions, and more ways to journey together. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and keep following the wisdom of your heart.